Hello everybody, welcome back to How the Light Gets In. I'm glad that you are here. I want to start today by telling you about my super cool t-shirt. You will notice that it says, "I'm a mess, I'm a wreck, I am perfect." If you were really up in your feelings in the mid-2000s, you may remember that as the lyrics to the song LG Fwad by Motion City Soundtrack. I was lucky enough to see them in Chicago on New Year's Eve, and it was awesome. And I bought this shirt, and it's a good sentiment that I think we should all keep in mind, because we can be messy wrecks who are perfect, and it's fine. Anyway, so 2 weeks ago, we did a whole lot of talking about cognitive distortions and what they are and how to recognize them. So today, we're going to do the second half of that, which is the part that I'm guessing you actually want. Where we talk about how to deal with those cognitive distortions. So the example that I used 2 weeks ago in part 1 of this video is my automatic thought when I hear sirens that someone that I love is dead. I struggled with that for a lot of years, and honestly, most of the time now I don't even notice sirens other than that, like, they're loud, and then I just go back to whatever I was doing. So for me, what I was doing with those thoughts, I was hearing sirens and I was fortune telling and catastrophizing with it. And part of what made it worse for me is that I was keeping that automatic thought a secret because I knew it was crazy. So I didn't want to tell anyone that my brain was doing this crazy thing. I have probably said this before, but the more that you hold that stuff in, the worse that it tends to get and the more power it tends to have. So a few years ago, I just told my boyfriend, like, hey, if I ever call you in the middle of the day for like no obvious reason and like just chat for a minute and then hang up, it's because I became convinced that you were dead and I needed to prove to myself that you were still alive. And he did laugh at me a little bit, which is fair because, come on. But ever since he gave me permission to do that, I've never actually needed to do it. Like, once I gave that crazy thought voice and started looking at what I was doing with this very simple stimuli, it really stopped being a problem for me. So above and beyond anything else that we're going to talk about today, the worst thing you can do with your crazy thoughts is like stuff them farther into your brain. Because for whatever reason, the human brain is convinced that if you keep things a secret, then they're really, really, really important and need to be thought about all the time. Thanks, brain. So we're going to go down the same list we went through 2 weeks ago and talk about these cognitive distortions. I will give you a very brief reminder of what they are, and then I will tell you how you can start to deal with them. I super hope that you have already seen part 1 of this. If you have not, please stop watching this and go back. And if you have seen it, I hope that you took a couple of weeks to really look at and take some notes about the kind of cognitive distortions that you see playing out in your own beautiful brain. So the first one is mind reading. As a quick reminder, that is thinking that you know how someone else thinks or feels. You need to, in order to better deal with your mind reading tendencies, actually examine the evidence for your beliefs. If you catch yourself having a thought that so-and-so hates you, okay, well, why do I think that she hates me? Do I have any external validation for that belief? No? Okay, so it's probably not true. You can also, I don't know, confront that and say, hey, do you hate me? And most likely they're gonna say no. Why? And then you're gonna have to say, like, I don't know, my brain did a weird thing, don't worry about it, and then like move past it. And I know that it's hard to like voice the crazy thoughts when they happen, but everyone has crazy thoughts. It is okay. Let it into the air and let it breathe so that it will stop poking you and making you crazy. Fortune telling is predicting the future without any actual evidence. So again, we're gonna want to look for evidence for our beliefs. If you have decided that this job that you're applying for, you're not gonna get, why? Are any of those based in fact? Are you applying for a job as an emergency room surgeon and actually you are a like pizza delivery driver? Because yeah, you're probably not going to get that job. But if you have a medical degree and experience, then you can't jump straight to I'm never going to get it. Consider all of the available outcomes, all of the available possibilities. It's going to be uncomfortable if you are not used to considering positive outcomes. But the more that you force yourself to explore all the different ways a thing could go, the more you're going to be able to let go of a belief in a negative outcome. Catastrophizing. We talked about catastrophizing last time as basically taking everything to the darkest place you can and then assuming that you'll be unable to deal with it. If you are struggling a lot with catastrophizing, I recommend that you go back and watch the tolerating discomfort video. I recommend that you maybe do a quick Google search on the phrase radical acceptance and do some reading there. The better you get with dealing with discomfort, the more you're going to be able to trust yourself to cope with discomfort when it arises. Because catastrophizing is not just about seeing the worst possible outcome. It is seeing the worst possible outcome and assuming that you won't be able to handle it. But if you really work on and invest in your ability to deal with difficulty, then when difficulty seems inevitable, you'll be able to have faith in yourself that you'll be able to handle it. Because you probably can. Unless like nothing bad has ever happened to you in your entire life, which is criteria that applies to no human on the earth, you have some skills available to you to deal with it if things don't go the way that you want them to. It helps if you build those talents, if you increase your coping skills, if you get real good at radically accepting things. And then you can just be like, yeah, it all might, catch on fire and be terrible, but I know how to deal with things that are on fire and terrible. No big deal. So labeling, again, is taking the outcomes, like your behavior, your words, things like that, and generalizing that to your value as a person. So it's not I have failed, it's I am a failure. If that is one that you catch yourself dealing with a lot, make sure that you are staying focused on the thing that you have failed. That doesn't sound right. What I mean is separate your actions, separate your output, separate your behavior from your essential qualities as a person, because they are not the same thing. Just because you mess something up does not mean that you are a mess up. Just because you weren't able to keep a relationship together doesn't mean that you're unable to have relationships. Make sure that you are looking at things in the right pieces and parts and not just like smushing them together into a sandwich of why you suck, because that's not doing you any favors. So if you have found yourself discounting positives, which is exactly like it sounds, you're throwing out any positive ideas and focusing only on the negative ones. When you catch yourself doing that, again, consider all of the possible options, even the positive ones, and make yourself really sit with the positive options, because it's going to feel wrong because it's not something that you're used to doing. So this is another situation where you're going to have to build your tolerance for doing something new. And even if you don't feel like you really believe these positive options, at least you are generating alternative thoughts for yourself. It's going to make it easier to get better at not completely throwing out all of the positives in the world. Start recognizing your accomplishments and the positive qualities about you, because no matter how much you feel like you are a human dumpster fire, I promise you, you're probably not. No one is as crazy as they think they are. I have learned that over and over and over again in my profession. Similarly, none of us are as normal as we think we are. We all exist in this delightful gray area of being messy and imperfect and good. If you catch yourself with a negative filter a lot of the time, then you are going to want to let yourself consider positive alternatives to your very negative thoughts. In addition, you're going to want to work on keeping a broader viewpoint. I think we talked about this a couple weeks ago, actually. The idea that however you feel right now is how your brain assumes you're going to feel forever. And I think in a lot of ways, negative filter is a function of that mechanism, where if you're used to things being crappy, you just assume that they're always going to be crappy. Make yourself acknowledge that sometimes good things happen, and don't ignore them when they occur, because they are important. It is not always going to be a shit show, I promise. You just have to let yourself broaden your viewpoint enough that you can see when it's not. Overgeneralization is similar to labeling. Again, it is when we take little teeny tiny nuggets of information and apply that across really broad context. So, all women are crazy because one woman one time was crazy. So with this one, just remember that one incident does not make like a hard and fast rule. Like, I'm guilty of this one. I actually had like a real fear of female dogs for a long time, because the female dog that I had growing up and the female dog that some family members had growing up were like evil and would growl and snap at you. And so I just had like created this idea in my head that you can't trust female dogs. And then my boyfriend went and adopted one, and I had a moment where I was like, oh God, she's gonna chew my face off while I sleep. Except our sweet little Zoe is the cutest thing that ever lived and has not bitten me since she was a puppy, at which point she was biting everyone and it wasn't my problem. The point is, when you catch yourself making these sweeping generalizations, try and limit your focus to just the thing that you are talking about. So if Linda is crazy, then let Linda be crazy. It doesn't mean that all of the women are crazy. If Gary is an asshole, let Gary be an asshole. It's not like all of the dudes are assholes. Again, this is going to take some practice and some time because you are forcing your brain to do things with information that it doesn't normally do. And our brains are lazy and hate that, as we have discussed over and over again. But just try and separate those single incidents from a universal rule. If you are used to thinking in terms of black and white, which is dichotomous thinking, as we discussed a few weeks ago, try and find some gray area for yourself. When you've already established your dichotomy, make yourself think about whether or not there is space between those two things or if they are literally right next to each other. Now, I'm not going to pretend like there aren't some situations where there truly is no gray area, because there are. And you will be able to recognize those when they arise, because they'll feel really safe and comfortable to you because they exist in the way that your brain wants them to. But with everything else, you're going to want to try and create some gray area. And by creating that gray area, you are taking the pressure off that situation. Because if it's not just like I pass or I fail, it's like I could do pretty well or I could do not very well. You give yourself a lot more room to maneuver. And things are not going to feel as important or as difficult or as stressful as they did before. This one takes a lot of practice because you are probably practicing black and white thinking without really noticing it. Just anytime you find yourself thinking things that involve, either, like the word either, you need to start looking if maybe there's like an and in there instead. Like, are there other options available to you? So just try and look for gray area when you catch yourself being too black and white about things. Shoulds, this is where your radical acceptance is going to come back into play. So I think I've said this 3 times so far, but again, go back and watch the Tolerating Discomfort video, because there I will tell you how to radically accept things. And you can also do a Google search for that term again and read some articles about it. Maybe find someone who doesn't curse as much who will explain it to you. I don't know, just an idea. But with shoulds, you just want to focus on tolerating your discomfort and accepting things for what they are instead of fixating on what you think they should be. If you are personalizing things and you are accepting a lot of blame, you need to start thinking a little bit differently in terms of how much responsibility you are willing to accept and how much responsibility is reasonable for you to accept. Most of the time, no matter how much we think things are entirely all for our fault, there's like other factors at play that you can also pin some of that blame to. With personalizing, you're also going to want to consider other people's perspectives. We can talk again about my severe road rage issues for many years. What helped me get over that was acknowledging that other people weren't driving the way that they were driving because they thought I needed to be inconvenienced and punished. They were living their lives and I was living mine, and sometimes they intersect, but it doesn't mean that they were coming at me to ruin my life. So with personalizing, you're just going to want to look for alternative perspectives and really make yourself consider those instead of outright dismissing them as soon as you come up with the thought. Blaming. So technically, I think this one's really easy to deal with. Not easy. It's simple to deal with. It's gonna feel terrible. So if blaming is something that you catch yourself doing a lot, you're gonna wanna be really careful, because if you go too hard on this one, you're just gonna push yourself into its opposite, which is personalizing. So you're gonna want to very kindly and very gently work with yourself and examine your own life and look and see if there are ways that you are contributing to or exacerbating or creating your own difficulty. Just don't be a dick about it, or you're gonna wind up with a completely different cognitive distortion, which, you know, is not a net positive for you, because both of them are hard to deal with. Be willing to be wrong. Be willing to feel bad, because those are both going to be parts of this. Honestly, I see this mostly when I'm working with teenagers. Most adults don't seem to struggle with this as much. They seem to focus more on the blaming side of things. But just try and keep an open mind about how you might be more of an active agent in your life than you realize. Because I think it's easy to start to believe that you are always just reacting to whatever is being thrown your way. And if you are, that sounds like a terrible way to live. And you need to start looking at ways that you can be a little bit more proactive and a little bit more involved in your own choices, instead of always just responding to whatever has happened last. If you are making a lot of unfair comparisons in your life, I jokingly / sadly compared myself to Lindsay Ellis a couple weeks ago, as you may remember, which was an unfair comparison for me. So really look at all the criteria that are going into those comparisons. If you're comparing yourself to, you know, John who lives down the street, do you and John have the same resources available? Have you and John put the same amount of time into this? Have you and John, spent the same amount of money or dedicated yourselves the same way? Do you have the same support? If those things are similar, then sure, compare yourself to John all day. But if John's like a kabillionaire who can pay a private chef and a personal trainer and like whatever else you need, and he's lost 50 more pounds than you this week, like maybe John's not really the benchmark you should be using, because John's resources far outstrip your own. So just look at all of the aspects of that comparison that you're making and make sure that things relatively line up. And then, compare away once you've done that part. If you are struggling with regret orientation, if you spend a great deal of your time thinking and obsessing about things that you may have done wrong in the past and what you should have or could have or would have done differently, let it go. Let yourself accept that that part of your life is over. You made the best decision you could with the information that you had available. And you can repeat that phrase to yourself as much as you need to. I actually, there's a song, it's called The Worst Part. It's by Motion City Soundtrack. There is a little piece of that song where he says, I did everything right. I did everything I thought was right. And I repeat that in my head over and over again when I catch myself caught in a regret orientation, because we always do. Most of us don't charge headlong into situations hoping we're gonna fuck it up. You know what I mean? Like, we do our best. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out, and that's okay. So try and let yourself off the hook. Try and let go of those past negative experiences. Try and believe that you did the best that you could, because you did. You always do. If you struggle with what if, then you need to refer back to when I was talking about catastrophizing. And I was like, learn to sit with discomfort and trust yourself, because it's the same thing. Let yourself be uncomfortable and believe in your ability to deal with that discomfort. Because sure, maybe if you do the thing that I told you to do, you might be more anxious for a little bit, and then you're going to habituate to that anxiety and you're going to be okay. The more that you build that tolerance for discomfort, the more successful you're going to be across the board. So really focus on that as a skill to build. If you catch yourself dealing with a lot of emotional reasoning and your feelings are kind of steering the ship, set some specific goals for yourself that don't come from an emotional place. Get your brain in the habit of getting into routines and habits that are motivated by what you want or what you need and not just what you feel. The more that you exercise that like discipline thing, I almost said bone, but that would have been nonsense. There's no disciplined bone. What the hell am I talking about? Anyway, the more that you work on your ability to be disciplined in pursuit of goals, the easier it will be to be less ruled by your emotions and how you make your choices. With an inability to disconfirm, again, and be open to alternative viewpoints. Consider alternative viewpoints. Let yourself be wrong about stuff. Isn't the fun thing about cognitive distortions that the way that you deal with them is like basically the same 4 things over and over again? I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, but I'm also right, so do what I say. And if you catch yourself caught in a judgment focus, you are going to want to start practicing a lot of mindfulness for yourself. We haven't talked much about mindfulness practice. We definitely will at some point. But mindfulness practice is basically anything that allows you to stay at peace and in the moment. With mindfulness, we are trying to avoid judgment focus. So we teach you skills to notice and describe without judging, because judging does not tend to help us very much. So you can practice being more observant and more descriptive without being judgmental. You know, pick some random item in your room and describe it without picking anything that has a value judgment beside it. So like there's 3 chairs in my living room and one of them sucks. But if I make myself describe all 3 of those chairs without value judgment, then on paper, I'm not going to notice that the one chair sucks. You know what I mean? Get in the practice of observing and describing without judging, and it will help you avoid that judgment focus in the future. That's it. All 17 cognitive distortions, part 2, and ways that you can deal with them and make your cognitions be less distorted. I hope that that was helpful. If you have questions, if any of this was unclear, please reach out to me on Twitter or by email or in the comments below. Please like and share and subscribe and tell everyone to watch me talk about stuff. I'm so glad that you guys were here. It was great. Glad I got to see you. So again, if you have been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder at any point in your life, please send me an email because I have some questions I'd like to ask you. And for the record, I'm not going to like put you on blast and be like, this is Connie, she has borderline personality disorder, here's all her shit. Just trying to gather some data so I can make more informed hypotheses. Thanks guys, I will see you next time.